Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito.
All right, welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa podcast. My name is Yinka Olaito. As usual, you know that this is a platform that raises issues about issues that many are afraid to talk about, but such conversations are important so that we can actually have a clear direction of where we're going. On Difficult Conversation Africa podcast, it's a development-focused podcast, and today we are looking at media impact on democracy across Africa, not just only in Nigeria. And as usual, I will give you the background of that conversation before I introduce my guest. Media play a critical role in Nigeria and African democracy, often described as the fourth estate of the realm, due to its constitutional responsibility of holding power accountable. Democracy cannot function very well without the influence of the media. Media has the duty to inform citizens, promote accountability, as well as foster participation and safeguarding democratic values in all that they do. Democracy can benefit from a robust media sector, but unfortunately, sometimes the power that be often abuse the power that is in the Constitution to stifle media performance. In this episode, like I said, we're focusing on media and democracy in Africa, and my guest is Mr. Dapo Olorunyomi. As you know, is a leader for most of us who are aware of his leading role in the media industry. Is a leader of media newsroom. He started out as investigative journalist, and he had done quite a lot of work around this place. He is also a media entrepreneur, and in many cases, he had initiated several thriving media businesses or media-related businesses. He can be called a serial founder. Welcome, sir, Mr. Olorunyomi.
Thank you so much, Yinka. It's such a pleasure and obviously an honor for me. And thank you for the important work that you do around media, particularly around young people.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you, and thank you for your time. I know you are a busy person. I would say that you have been quite a strong inspiration for me and for most of our team here in Lagos, and I wish you that you continue to live long in health for all of us in Jesus' name. So let's go straight to the question. In terms of its watchdog and accountability duties, has the media sector played its crucial role with the highest integrity, sir?
Well, so we have to periodize the question that you've asked, and I would take it that you mean whether it's played its accountability role with regards to the
Yes.
current in our democracy.
Yes, sir.
First, a kind of prelude, and I think you have laid the basis quite clearly that if we have a democracy, we're hoping to govern our communities and life of people and citizens in such a way that they have the power to change their own stations in life, and also the power to improve those communities to serve them better. That's the central core, really, of the goals and ends of democracy, and if that is going to happen, there are certain institutions, certain requirements to make that possible. Obviously, we talk about structures like, having a well-run management as the whole managers of community to get things done. Evidently, these are people we find in the executive institutions of community. We have people to set policies and laws, and we have them in the legislative quarters. And then when there are contentions around how this will work, and when we want to lay the boundaries and mark the frontiers of justice, we have people in the judiciary. The understanding is that if democracy will really work well, you still have a need for an institution, which is not an institution of the states, but in an institution of civil society. And that's where the media comes in. I always want us to make a distinction when we talk of media, that in this regard, we're talking of the news media, knowing full well that with its requirement to a democracy, it's not the wide and that variegated landscape of what we call media that fits into this kind of a calling. So, Section 22, therefore, which is an aspirational clause in our Constitution, then speaks of the duty of the media, to help hold power structures within this community accountable, knowing full well that accountability and the ability for things to be open and evident in terms of how we work and make that community meaningful and substantive for people will depend on a culture of transparency. That one institution will need to play that role. And that institution happens to be the institution of the news media. And that is why it is said in the political theory of journalism that its duty in every democracy, will be one, as you have correctly asked, to help put that structure of accountability in process. But besides that, it has an added function, which would then be, once that has happened, once you're holding power to account, you also have responsibility within the community of people to then help mobilize them around the purpose and goals of democracy itself, around the goals and purpose of good governance. So in this regard, you set agenda. You have to set those substantive agenda that will improve citizens' life, but also community life. And at the end of the day, once all this is done, the understanding then, of course, is that you set those normative structure, those structures of value about how everything that we've put together works out in a very ethical way, works within, the norms of decency and conduct, institutional conduct, so that there are no abuses. So I give that prelude so that we understand better that, when we then talk of that
That's true. That's true.
accountability matrix, we really have a very clear view about. My sense
Of
is
what we're
that
saying.
it's up and down. There's sense which you could say that the media, that the news media has played interesting, accountability roles. And obviously, in many important respects, due to faults that are not necessarily endemic, but which is a little bit outside its context. The media has also failed to play such things as, restrictive laws and policies of the states about how to really build media as a business in contemporary Nigerian society. Although this is true of a global situation today about the fortunes of media. But besides all that, there's also slips, professional slips that is setting in. There are ethical failings within the media itself that's setting in. So we're seeing a whole convergence of issues, some which are very internal, but most of which really are outside the control of media itself, things you will then call ecosystem handicaps and constraints that's made it a little difficult to play
Its
this
role.
accountability role very well
Uh,
in
thank,
contemporary.
thank you, sir, for that, for raising some of these issues. We will come back to some of the issues you have raised, but I'm happy that you are very honest and your evaluation had been very, very transparent and honest enough about some of the challenges that media, in specific term, news media play in democracy. But media is supposed to play. So I will focus more on the role of the media before we come into other issues that affect its functionality as a sector. Media is supposed to play important role in mobilization of citizens for political participation as well as promote unbiased democratic value. With has media fare well in this area? Because often we see that each media houses or news media owner, we'll not get to that now, has their own biases and their own lineage. So, in mobilizing the citizen for political participation, how has that? How can we? How will you adjudge the situation, sir?
I think I think it's also you can give a fair assessment of this by saying that in most regards, it has helped to describe the goals of democracy, the street life of community, the notion of public good that a democratic society envisages. But I think, you know, its ability to be a, a strong voice, a purposive voice in bringing together people for political participation. If you look at the outcomes in every respect, take elections, you might say that that's not the best way to think of that responsibility. I mean, from the point of fulfillment, we say having significantly under 40% of voter turnout. Um, Elections are that key yardstick through which you really understand as media itself been able to move people around important causes. Take issues of corruption. I mean, you will still say that there's rampant corruption, almost wild levels of corruption in this country. Take issues of human rights violations. We are seeing an escalation of human rights violations. Take issues of just the security of lives and property. No time in the history of this country, except probably after during the Nigerian Civil War, have we seen the level and intensity of attack on, the Nigerian citizenry as we find it today, either through banditry, kidnapping, armed robbery, and of course, an insurgency that has now gone beyond a whole decade. If you put all this together, noting that from the security perspective, the Nigerian military, which ought to be fighting external wars, are now internally deployed and are deployed in about 34 or so states in the country. You see that there's indeed a state of emergency, which is just not announced as such. Now, these are huge constraints to real active participation of citizenry. In a way, that you have to ask whether the media has been able, both in terms of effective description of the crisis and in helping to build communities around solution, whether we've done it, I would say, I'm sorry, not so much so. So why is this the case? One, of course, is education. The level of awareness of the problem, it's a, I don't have data, so we have to be careful when we make very bland and generalized statements. But
Exactly.
if you just look at terms of you really wonder whether the educator himself does not need to be fully educated. Media needs to be deeply
Oh,
informed
God.
about things that are going on and the logic and approach around which those problems have been organized, because you cannot be describing fully and comprehensively and, of course, truthfully something that you yourself don't have a very clear understanding about. So I see a big knowledge gap in the media, which needs to be addressed if these roles are played. I think that's the general assumption that people make, that the work we do in media is a simple one. Actually, it is not. It so requires so much knowledge. It's an institution which helps to make citizens reach decision points, decision about choices. And if you will have to do that, you are carrying a lot of responsibility to help people make a decision about their preferences, about how they govern themselves better, even about consumer products that will help make their life better. You need a lot of knowledge yourself so as to be able to move people. So for political participation, for democratic outcomes, I think we will really need to do a lot of teaching, a lot of learning as for ourselves and the media about the meaning of democracy, its goals, and the important role that media should play in that kind of arrangement. But above all, I think also the kinds of trade-offs that are always necessary if society, because sometimes decisions that are taken in the short run may not necessarily be the interest of citizens, but they can have long run effect and value. But those kinds of trade offs need to be explained in a way that brings strength and power to citizens so that we don't just become uh, a hysterical megaphone that is just, how they say it, when you start shouting fire in the theater,
All right.
so that we become part of the problem, in other words. Yeah.
Thank you for this comprehensive and holistic view of your response to that question. One other thing that I've seen is that while media continuing to play its role, political mobilization, the security situation is also a critical factor to look at. But as a leader in the industry, I appreciate the holistic way at which you look at it. That even we all need education into some form of, or in one form or the other. Even the media industry need a letter of education. The next question has to do with funding. These are some of the one of the challenges within the media industry. Funding is really, really a challenge now, particularly with all the noise across Africa and across the globe in terms of funding generation and all that. And because of that, we've seen a few of media houses in a way, we may not say that totally they deviated from the ethics of the profession, but we can see that some of the practices and their news production lack some level of merit and great work that we expect from professionals. How can we stem this, sir?
Well, it is a big problem. So you have really turned on the central crisis affecting global media, but which is far in greater proportion in the African media, of which the
Mm,
Nigerian media has carried a lot of cake. let me put it this way. Media needs to be fully resourced to be able to play its role properly in a democracy.
Okay.
Now, if media fails, we often say, and I think it was Robert McChesney, one of the leading media scholar and democracy thinker, who had said that, democracy deteriorates only to the proportion in which the media deteriorates. What he means, of course, is that see a democracy failing. There will be many reasons for it, but the central reason for the failure of democracy often is the failure of media. Because you are the one institution put in place to serve as the accountability bench. You are the strength, of that democracy, but you can also be the weakness of that democracy. That's the kind of moral burden around which the theory, a democratic theory of media, is understood. Now, if that's the case, we expect that media to have the right kinds of resources, human resources at a quality level, uh, resources to run news operations, resources to, in fact, help build the opinion and the way opinion is measured, in society. But above all, how the product of news production is then built around the whole community. In other words, how do we distribute the resources of what we have produced internally as products of media? I think one last point, of course, then is also how do you ensure that the financing of everything we call news operation, media operation, is blemished and it's at capacity. That's why of all questions relating today in the world, I would say today, perhaps the most central is the sustainability issues around media, which generally people call, the media business model. Business model, of course, merely means that how a business makes money, makes profit, and able to continue to build itself. So this business model challenge um, became an issue, at least in Nigeria, at a very high level, at a very decent, I would say, probably in the early or mid 1990s. We started seeing a dramatic shift. Remember, some of this is almost like folkloric. People used to say when people like Babatunde Jose and the daily times of old, they were able to do almost 500,000 of prints. I myself started my journalism career in a very local newspaper in Ilorin called the Herald newspaper. I just left school before I went to university. Um, I worked as a little copy boy in the newsroom, and eventually they thought I could write well. Then they trained me as a cop reporter. But what's significant about the Herald of old was that at its peak, this was the years when people like Sheikh Moshoba came in to run it as I believe, the general manager of the paper. He was the editorial and administrative powerhouse of that paper. And they had reached peak about 400,000 copies a day, which is the most shining moment of that small newspaper. Now, come back to today and see what newspapers are producing. I say it's sometimes with pain, and I say that newspapers, I don't know any Nigerian newspaper that's doing 50,000 copies a day. And people, people need to, don't let me say people do not. People need to understand what this means at the level of citizenship development, building literacy, all the roles that newspapers play at the level of helping to build awareness around issues and so on and so on. So there's a fundamental now crisis of, the highest proportion in the newspaper press, in the broadcast media, uh, and must tell you at level of media convergence in this country today. So what are the reasons for this problem? My own way of explaining this is to say, circle back, understand that a fundamental transition happened in the way we understand the management of society in the 90s. And that transition is called the digital transition. That transition to digital meant that the way things were done in the past came to a point, it's like a cliff where things now had reached their apogee, is incapable of developing in the old ways, and is now renewed through new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. So the way we produce newspapers, even when it appears that managers of the whole newspaper institutions are not fully aware, the logic of doing so has changed dramatically. And ditto for the whole broadcast industry.
All right, Mr. Dapo Olorunyomi, thank you. Because of the time and because we have a time limit for each episode, we are bringing an end to the discussion at this part. The other part that we'll be recording will be in part 2 of the conversation. Thank you and see you. Okay, viewers, thank you for listening. I hope you will look forward to part 2 of the conversation. Don't forget to always subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't also forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as on our project website. As usual, don't forget to send us email, info@difficultconversationafrica.org. See you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 3160591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.